Here are a few of the additional buildings I've been working on for the shop, and these are going to be pieces that I'm able to use along with a couple of different textures to piece everything together. And the section that was modeled earlier is not part of this scene. But I did want to show you some techniques for different roof types, because we really only covered one roof type. And I've got two other types of roofs in here where I've got low poly model with a little bit of curvature. It's kind of a French style. And that's going to require an entirely different type of setup for the roof template. Over here in front is another object. We take a look. It's just a very simple design, and the UV maps are just kind of a downward projection, and because of that there is a little bit of stretching that has to be done to the template, and also the overall setup will change. But to make it as versatile as possible, there are a couple of techniques. So if we take a look, what we're going to do is create file template using masks. And the first setup is going to be just for this building in front here and that roof type. So we're going to create a new document. Let's create it 1024 by 1024. And what we need to do is divide the document up and create 4 different masks to run each of the roof sections through. And I'm going to open up the roof template, and we can use just starting with one of the sections, and these are unmerged. So what I'm going to do is just create a copy, merge the group, and then we can duplicate this over to the new document, close it out, don't need to save any changes, and I'm going to start by creating 4 copies. So we have a couple of copies here, and what I want to do is angle them to the different directions that they'll be facing. So let's go ahead and make number 4 the top. So just using Control T for free transform, and then rotating that around. I'm going to turn that off. Go down to the next layer and do the same thing. Angle it off to the other side. And then the next one will be the bottom where it currently is. Turn that off. And then the original, I'm going to make that left side. So now what we need to do is mask this off to cut out the sections, so we don't need to destroy these original layers, and we can move within the mask. So basically in Cinema, when we have the UV map set up for the roof, and to the full extent, create a new texture, and I've already set this one up, just called it the roof mask, and we have these 4 primary pieces. Well, we can use these to create a very quick mask. So I'm going to create a UV mesh layer, and then I can go ahead and just save the texture. Go into Photoshop and open that up. And then we can duplicate the mesh or use the same file. But since I already have one set up, move that over, and I'm going to bring this all the way up to the top. And what we can now use is one of the selection tools to select the area within these 4 different sections. And we could use the magic wand tool will work. And so I'll start with the magic wand tool. These are pretty much the default settings. Anti-aliasing on, it's continuous, and it's a 32 tolerance. Since it is selecting the areas just as we need them, this will work fine. So we'll select that first top area, and then select the layer for the top. And I'm going to go ahead and rename these, which is going to be A, B, C, and D, so that we have A, B, C, D moving around clockwise. So after the selection is made, we can select that layer and use the quick mask. Go back to the top layer, select the right side, move away down, create a quick mask. Select the bottom part, select C, and you may not need to create a mask for the bottom because it is already being overlapped by everything else, but I'm going to add one in anyway. So this really simplifies the design for this, and you can use this setup for any roof type. So having that UV mesh layer and just using the magic wand, very quick way to create masks for this. If you're not using Cinema and using another application for this, you could use print screen in order to just grab the look of the UV, or you could just draw a line from the different corners. That would also work. But that's just a really quick way to use the UV mesh layer to set up the template. So now what we can do is unlink all of these masks, because we do not want them to move, but we do want to be able to move the individual layers. And that way we can align any of the tiles or create the randomness that we need. Also going to turn off snap. And if you want to match up the tiles, you can, but I'm going to be running a strip along the corners, so I don't really need to worry about that. So we can just shift these around, line them up. If you want to do any rotation, and flip it vertically, just to add more of a variance. You can also use a filter on it, maybe some sort of distortion, just to vary that. Now, I was talking before about the stretching, and because we're basically looking down on this, and the full area of the polygon will extend much higher, and really to get the most accurate part of the image, we would have to extend what would be the center point. And let's just take a look at the C group, which is the bottom. That top point would have to be much higher, probably about up here. But the only thing is, it's going to be a lot harder to develop the texture without adding additional polygons for each of the overlay strips, or the strips that are going to go diagonally. So we may need to stretch in order to stay consistent. Now, these current textures are not set up or sized correctly for this, so I would have to add additional layers. But basically just stretching them in, free transform, so Control T, and then you can pull the sides in. And you would want to do that for each of the individual layers. You can also, probably better to set this up ahead of time if you're going to be stretching this, but just make a copy and stick it underneath the bottom set of tiles. So one thing I'm going to do is fill in the background with black, turn off the UV mesh layer, and all we really need to do is add in the strip. So we can open up the original roof template and grab what would be that center strip. Might want to modify the overall color of it. Just going to merge the group and duplicate the layer over to my untitled document. And then we're going to put that all the way on the top. And then we would also need to stretch these as well. But basically the same as before, just setting up a couple of copies, rotating them. In this case, we could just rotate them 45 degrees. And it would need to go the other way around for this bottom one. And because I have a little bit of separation there, I can just use the eraser, erase that section. But now we can line these up. And just holding down Alt and Shift to create a duplicate. Shift just constrains it. We can rotate that horizontally, move it into place. Duplicate it, flip it vertical, move that into place, and then create one more copy. Control T for free transform, flip it horizontally, hold down Shift to move that over, and move that one into place. So all we would really need is some sort of connecting cap for the top. Also, the fact that we have such a high range for each of these materials, or each of the strips, as opposed to the tiles, I might want to set up a layer style. So we do a color overlay, just to make it a little brighter and higher up. Right-click on the layer, copy the layer style, and we can select all of the other layers. Right-click, paste the layer style, and that will lift it all up. And then we could lower the other ones as well if we wanted to darken them. It would be easier just to create a fill layer. So we can add new layer, just fill it with black, the paint bucket tool, and just drag the opacity. So you set up a connecting cap on the top, or you can just use the eraser tool and kind of trim off the ends if you wanted. But let's go ahead and create a really quick cap, just using the, we'll just use the rectangle tool, switch the color to the white, and just drag out a rectangle. Now I'm going to have to move this layer up above everything else. We can right click, rasterize it. I'm going to create a duplicate. Control T for free transform. Holding down Shift to constrain the rotation. Hit enter to end that. And then what we can do is just hit Control E to merge it down. And now double click to set up a layer style. Use inner shadow to turn off the distance and adjust the size. And we might need to maybe modify this a little more. And if we go over to gradient overlay, we can set this to diamond. And I also have this reversed, just the typical black and white. We could choose a different mode if we wanted to darken or use a burn. I'm just going to set it to normal. We can adjust the scale and then modify the inner shadow so it's not as bright as it currently is, or as low of a contrast or high of a contrast with such a dark output. So we just want to bring in the edges a little. We could increase the gradient overlay or lower the midpoint, or the bottom point, which would be the black, selecting the color of probably the lowest point of the other tiles, or even the highest point, to make sure it's not overlapping too much. Change the opacity to 100. And if you're not seeing it quite enough, you might need to step it down, and we can do a little bit of a kind of post on it afterwards. But after that's done, we'll just add a new layer, set it underneath. We can merge that down, Control E, and then Control T for free transform, holding down Shift to rotate, to constrain, rotate it 45 degrees, V for move, and then set that cap on top. So it does look like I need to adjust one of the strips to get that to line up a little better. And also setting so that the high point where the next tile starts is under will also require less editing of the cap. And then we can Control L for levels and brighten that up a bit. And if you want to add a little bit of an edge, you can. For the most part, that should work pretty well. And now we have kind of a cap to the top. That's not probably the greatest. You could use a different method, kind of the same as before, for setting up the strip tiles, and then using a different overlay so you actually have the connecting pieces. This is going to be really smooth for the top, not a very high contrast, but it'll definitely work. So let's just take a look at this as a normal. So I'm going to go to the history and just create a duplicate state, new document, flatten it, and then because I'm not in the 32-bit version, I can't run the normal map, so I'm just going to close that for now, save out this template, and then open it up in the 32-bit version. Okay, so now I can run the NVIDIA Tools filter. We're going to use the max RGB. Let's go ahead and set our scale to 45. Click OK. And so let's save this out and take a look at it loaded in with Cinema. Now I didn't really pay too much attention to the edges. You might want to add a little bit of a dip or an edge if needed. I'm going to undo really quick and just show you that. Double click on the background layer, create a layer out of it, and just add in an inner shadow layer style. Turn off the distance, increase the size and the choke, and this will just make sure that the ends are going to be picking up that edge. It doesn't have to be anything perfect. Click OK, and then flatten, and then run the NVIDIA tool filter, or whichever normal mapping program you're using. So I'm going to create a new material, and we can drag that onto just this cube object I created just to show the roof, and then edit the material. Select the normal, turn that on, and then we can load in the image. And I'm going to go to the editor and just turn up the texture resolution. Turn on Enhanced OpenGL, and now we can see that roof. And I might need to adjust maybe some of the strips so they line up a little bit better. But it gives you a really good idea of how you can set up a template with these masks and create some pretty neat rooftops. So all we would need is, of course, the color and diffusion to go along with this, and the bump map as well. And I just added a point light. And make sure that I'm in object mode. And then you can see how that's reacting to the light. You could also set this up to have just a procedural color as well. You don't have to use image maps for everything. Creating the normals or displacement with an image works quite well because the file size isn't that large, and it can be a little more versatile sometimes. So depending on then the Phong angle you have set, you can create a lot of different looks for the roof and blend in some of those extra edges.